working people. He's proven it over and over again. So once again, I'm just going to turn it over to him. And how many of you really knew he was born in Brooklyn, New York? Woo, we got some New Yorkers in the house. So once again, let me introduce Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont.
Thank you very much for that introduction. This trip developed out of a visit that Donna made to my office, arranged by Phil, a number of months ago. I have never spoken publicly in the South. Something that I've wanted to do for a long time, and I'll tell you why. But anyway, we agreed to do this, and we scheduled that, and then out of that, I said, if we're going to come down here, why don't we do something a little bit more? So we ended up going to Mississippi, to Alabama, to Georgia, and here we are in South Carolina. And so we've had a busy few days, but a really wonderful few days. And the reason I very much wanted to come down here and meet with people and chat with people is that I can't do my job as the senator for the state of Vermont and representing my people on all of the issues that are of concern to them unless we have representation from 50 states in this country where people are prepared to stand up to work with. So I go home and people say, you know, we've got a jobs crisis in Vermont. Wages are going down. Healthcare is not what it should be. Kids can't afford college. What are you doing about it, Bernie? And I say, well, on a good day, we may have 54 votes, but we often need 60. That's another story we can get into. But it's hard to get the 60 votes or more that we need to do what the American people are telling us we need if state after state all over this country, which is largely composed of working people who are struggling to keep their heads above water, keep sending to Washington people who are working day and night against their own best interests. So I think what we're trying to hear today to talk about is to try to understand how it happens that in a state, in a nation, where we have so many serious problems, we're going to talk about them, we have representation in Washington which is so far removed from the needs of ordinary Americans. That's the issue. And the other issue is how it is, and what's the mechanism by which mostly white, to be honest with you, working class people keep voting against their own interests. So that's what we have to discuss. All right, let me just start off by giving you an overview of what's going on in this country. And I suspect what I am going to be telling you is not something that many other members of the Senate or the House will talk about. But that's why I'm here. If we look at the economy in America, I think we can summarize it in one sentence by saying that the middle class, the great middle class, the middle class of this country, which was once the envy of the entire world, is disappearing. In terms of poverty, we now have 46.5 million people living in poverty. That is the highest number ever. And while the middle class is disappearing and poverty is sky high, the people on top are doing phenomenally well. All right? So what do we have? We have today, according to the Census Bureau, a report that came out recently, and that is despite all of the huge increases in productivity. That's an important point to make. Everybody has an iPhone, they have an iPad, and you go to factories, there's all kinds of robotics, there's all kinds of new technology. We have seen a huge increase in worker productivity in the last 20 or 30 years. That's good news. Now, if I give you a tool and you can do your job much more productively, much more quickly, you can produce more, one would think that the result of that is you'd be working fewer hours or you'd be making more money. But the reality is that despite all of that increase in productivity, most people are working longer hours for lower wages. There's something wrong with that equation. Now, I'll give you an example of how bad it is. A study came out from the U.S. Census Bureau a few weeks ago. And what the study said is that in the last 24 years, since 1989, today, the median family income, that family right in the middle of American society, has less income than that family did 24 years ago. Can you imagine that? What you're looking at is that the average male worker made $283 less in real wages than they did 44 years ago. How's that? You have the average female worker earning $1,700 less last year than she did in 2007. So what you are seeing is when you see the anger all over America, it's not often discussed, and that's one of the problems. People are angry, and they have every reason in the world to be angry. They're angry because they're working harder, earning less. Maybe even more importantly, they're angry because they're seeing their kids doing worse than they did. My father came to this country when he was 17 years of age from Poland, and he came without a nickel in his pocket. And to be honest with you, our family never had much money. We lived in a very small apartment. But in a sense, he lived the American dream and was extremely proud. He was able to send his two boys to college. That was a huge deal, coming from a guy who dropped out of high school in Poland. And that was the dream that tens of millions of families experienced. You work hard so that your kids can do a little bit better than you. And now, for the very first time in the modern history of the United States of America, we are in a situation where everything being equal, unless we change it, our kids will do worse than we do economically, and that is something we should not allow to happen. Okay? Now, I want to raise a few other issues with you that you're not going to see discussed too often on TV, too often discussed in Congress, or too often discussed in media in general. And that is a phenomenon called distribution of wealth and distribution of income. You all know what that is about?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, distribution of wealth is a pretty simple concept. It says, many of you have worked for many, many years. Most people work their whole lives. And at the end of the day, what do they have in material goods from what they have worked for? What have they got? We don't talk about it too much. So if there's one fact that I hope you'll remember from what I say today, I want you to remember this one. In terms of distribution of wealth in America, that is what we own. That means our money in the bank, our stocks, our homes, our cars, all that stuff. In America today, the top 1% owns 38% of the wealth. Okay? You follow what I'm saying? So in a room of 100 people reflecting all of America, top 1% owns 38% of all of the wealth. Now, that's one thing, but let me ask you something else. Does anybody have any idea what the bottom 60% of American people own? You want to be a little bit more specific than that. The answer is 2.3%. Bottom 60%, somewhere around 200 million Americans, own 2.3% of the wealth. Top 1% own 38% of the wealth. Now, you don't hear that talked about terribly often. There are reasons why you don't want to, our friends who own the country don't want to talk about it. Now, that's wealth. That's what we accumulate for our entire lives. Let me talk about income, which is what we make last year. In terms of income, a study came out fairly recently, which talked about the fact that between, in the last 3 years, between 2009 and 2012, 95% of all new income went to the top 1%. Got that? 95% of all new income went to the top 1%. So bottom line is, we are living in a nation in which the vast majority of people are struggling. Working families have a hard time earning a decent living, have a hard time dealing with childcare for their kids, becoming harder and harder to send their kids to college, and if their kids do go to college, they're coming out deeply in debt. We have seen in recent years, in the last 10 years, the loss of 50,000 manufacturing plants in the United States of America that used to pay workers a decent wage. And those plants that remain open, we've talked about the rebirth of Detroit, the automobile industry. What you should understand is that the new jobs being created in the automobile industry pay almost half what the old jobs pay. So everyone gets up there on TV and says, we're really happy, we're creating some new manufacturing jobs. Yeah, that's good news. But those jobs are paying $14 an hour, not $28 an hour. 50% in some cases decline, not only in the automobile industry, but in other industries as well. There was an article that appeared a few months ago. General Electric was expanding in Louisville. Good news, they're creating jobs in Louisville. They asked the guy, well, why is General Electric expanding in Louisville? And he said, well, the answer is, wages in America are now becoming competitive with China and other countries. So they do their calculation and they say, okay, wages are lower in China, their infrastructure is not as good, their productivity is not as good, it takes a lot of money to transport goods from China to the United States, may as well build it in Louisville if we can lower wages significantly. And that is what is happening all over the world. 30 years ago when these guys, corporate America, and Republicans and many Democrats, came up with the idea of unfettered free trade, which meant that we could shut down plants in America, move to Mexico, move to China, pay people low wages, and bring the products back into America. The goal all along was to put pressure on wages in America, to say to workers, look, you can keep your job, but I can pay people in China $1 an hour. Why do I want to pay you 15 to 20 bucks an hour? We're going to cut your health care. Or we're going to take the job to China. You make the choice. That was going on all over America. And to a certain degree, they are succeeding. Aren't we all proud that wages in America are now competitive with China, etc.? No, we're not. All right? But that is overall what's happening. So in terms of distribution of wealth and distribution of income, in many ways, we are moving toward what we call an oligarchic form of society. You know what that means? It's not a term we throw around. When I was a kid, studying in school, it used to look at these small little, what they call banana republics in Latin America, right? And these were countries that were run by a handful of families. And one day they would elect this government, and the next year they would elect this government. They had elections, but the elections didn't matter any, because the same people ran the country. So economically, we see Wall Street today, the 6 largest financial institutions on Wall Street. Those nice fellows who we bailed out a few years ago. They have assets of $9 trillion, which is equivalent to 2/3 of the GDP of the United States of America. They write half of the mortgages and 2/3 of the credit cards of this country. Unbelievable concentration of ownership in the hands of a half a dozen major financial institutions who are greedy, who are reckless, and day after day, if you look at the papers, you see they're being convicted for illegal activity. These are the guys who control to a very significant degree the economy of the United States of America. So roughly, that's what's going on economically, what's going on politically. All right? And let me give you a point of view again that is a different point of view than many people have. What is really, I think, very frightening in terms of our democratic traditions is that millions and millions of people are simply giving up on the political process. They are in trouble, they're working hard, they're worried about their kids, they're worried about their parents, and they look at Washington, and they look at the Democrats, and they look at the Republicans, and they say, who's there for me? Who's there for me? And I think the recent fiasco that we had where the Republicans shut down the government only epitomized that. So let me just talk a little bit about what's going on politically. The most important point to be understood is that in the last 10, 15 years, the Republican Party has been converted from what was once what we call a center-right party, a moderately conservative party, to a right-wing extremist party. And that is a huge moment in American politics. What do I mean by that? In the state of Vermont, for example, for many, many years, Vermont was what we call a Republican state. But the Republicans who ran Vermont, who represented Vermont in the Congress, were people like George Aiken, Bob Stafford, Jim Jeffords, names you may not know. But these are all kind of moderate Republicans. They believed in education. They believed in women's rights. They believed in the environment. They were people you could sit down and talk to. Their views were not my views. They were moderate type people living in the real world. And perhaps the best example that I can give you of that type of Republican was Dwight David Eisenhower. You all remember Eisenhower? Yes. Eisenhower was a great American war hero. He was elected president in '52. When he ran for re-election in '56, this was what was on his platform. He says, I am really proud that we have raised the minimum wage. I am really proud that we have expanded Social Security to bring more people into the system, etc., etc. That's what he ran on as a Republican running for re-election in '56. Fast forward to 2013. Let's look at where we are right now. And this is a point that I hope all of you hear clearly. All of the attention in the last 3 weeks was on what took place in Washington. And as all of you know, what that was about is our Republican colleagues said, we are going to shut down the government, we're not going to have a budget, and we're going to bring the United States to the point of default, where for the first time in the history of this country, we're not going to pay our bills and likely drive the world economy into a recession, because when the largest economy on earth does not pay its bills, you have some financial problems and reverberations, okay? And the reason that they were prepared to do that is they wanted to stop and defund the Affordable Care Act and prevent 20 or 30 million Americans from gaining health insurance. And they were absolutely adamant that had to be ended before they were going to pay our bills and allow the government to continue to function. That was the first week, and then they shifted away from that, and they said, we are going to default, and we're going to keep the government shut unless we make changes in Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid. And then they kind of dropped that, and by the time it was over, they knew that they were beaten. They knew the American people were disgusted with their actions, and we reopened the government. And by the way, huge losses to our economy. Many, many billions of dollars. People really hurt. Okay, but here's the point. Everybody says, well, the issue was Obamacare. The issue was the Affordable Care Act. This is what I want you all to understand. For these right-wing extremists, for these nice-looking guys like Paul Ryan and the others, this is just the tip of the iceberg. And we need to spend a moment really understanding what their ideology is about. How many of you are familiar with some guys called the Koch brothers? The Koch brothers are worth $71 billion, that's with a B, $billion. And they are prepared to spend a good part of that money, not just trying to defeat and end the Affordable Care Act, but they want to transform America in a huge way. And that is the point that everybody has got to understand, and many people don't. So it's not just, oh, we don't like the Affordable Care Act, blah, 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 blah. That is the tip of the iceberg. What is their goal? Where do they really want to go with America? Where are they prepared to spend hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, not only on political campaigns, because as a result of the disastrous Citizens United decision, they can now spend as much as they want putting ugly line 30-second ads onto your TV as independent expenditures, but they are setting up all kinds of organizations. There's going to be a new organization popping up with a name, South Carolinians or whatever, and it's funded by these guys. And that goes on all over the country. They have unlimited sums of money. For them, $1 million is what 25 cents is for most people. What do they want? What do they want? What kind of society do they want? Well, this is some of what they want. For a start, they want the federal government to be withdrawn, to be taken out of most of the programs that are life and death to tens and tens of millions of Americans. Their goal is nothing less than to repeal virtually every major piece of legislation passed in the last 80 years since Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president. You name the piece of legislation they want to repeal. Let me just give you some examples. And, you know, some of them work in a little bit different ways than other people. For a start, what's on the agenda for today is to make substantial cuts in Social Security and benefits for disabled veterans. That's called the change CPI. We can talk about that later. But understand that is only a small part of what they want to do with Social Security. Their goal is to privatize Social Security, to end Social Security as we know it. Social Security, and the reason that's at the top of their list, you know why that reason is? Because Social Security has been phenomenally successful. Before Social Security was created in the 30s, half of the seniors lived in poverty. Today that number is too high. It's about 9.5%, too high, but that's a lot better than 50%. They want to repeal Social Security and have the American people put their retirement accounts into Wall Street, where huge amounts of money can be made by Wall Street. They want to end Social Security. In terms of Medicare, a couple of years ago, the Ryan budget, Paul Ryan is the chairman of the House Budget Committee, put together a budget. And he ended in his budget Medicare as we know it. And they converted it into a coupon or a voucher program. And this is what the program said, pretty simple. Okay, you are 67 years of age. Here is your check for $8,000. And when you go to the doctor and the doctor makes a diagnosis that you have cancer, that $8,000 will last you for at least 3 days. After the first round of tests, after the first 2 days in the hospital, we don't know. And I want you to take a deep breath and think about this. What happens to that person after those $8,000 disappear? And they don't have a lot of money. You're looking at a death sentence. And that is the simple reality. There is no other way to define it. And also, their goal is not only to stop the Affordable Care Act, to allow 20 or 30 million more Americans to get health insurance. Their goal is to make major cuts in Medicaid. Major cuts. Now, right now, a fact that is not widely known. Harvard University did a study a few years ago. And what they said is that every single year in the United States of America, about 45,000 people die because they don't get to a doctor when they should. Now, that's not really a surprising fact. If you have, and I have talked to doctors in Vermont, doctors all over the country, they all acknowledge this. Let's just say you don't have any health insurance, or even maybe you just have a high deductible, a $5,000 deductible, okay? Suddenly you wake up and you're really not feeling good, you've got a pain in your stomach. And you say, I don't feel good, maybe I should go to the doctor, but I can't afford the $200 that doctor's visit is going to cost, the $100. So I'll wait, see what happens. 6 months later, that person goes walking into the doctor's office. And the doctor said, why didn't you come here when you were sick? Well, I didn't have any insurance, I have a high deductible. Well, we're going to have to send you to the hospital now, or maybe the situation is terminal. So what you have is 45,000 people die every single year because they don't go to the doctor when they should. And in fact, sometimes if they live, they go to the doctor, they have to go to the hospital, we spend tens of thousands of dollars treating them for what could have been treated much less expensively if they had access to medical care. So, in terms of cutting Medicaid, what you're going to do without any question, without any doubt, is create a situation where people will die. Many, many thousands of people will die because they won't have access to it. So these guys want to cut end Social Security eventually, completely transform Medicare to a voucher program, and Medicaid as we know it. And here's just another example of where they're coming from. Right now, as you all know, the minimum wage in this country, federally, is a disastrously low $7.25 an hour, right? And one of the crises that we face is not only high unemployment, and real unemployment is about 14%, not 7.4%, but low wages. So you got tens of millions of people working for $8 an hour, $9 an hour. I was in Detroit a couple of months ago talking to a bunch of kids. They're working at fast food places. These are young people who graduated high school. They're getting $7.25 an hour, and you know what? They can't even get 40 hours. They're working 20 hours in one place and 20 hours in another place. I talked to a young man who was working 3 jobs, taking a bus, going to fast food places. It's going on all over America. My view is we have to raise the minimum wage to at least $10 an hour. Now, it certainly wouldn't surprise you that the Republicans don't agree with that. But what would surprise you is what the Republican position is on the minimum wage. You know what it is? What do most of them now believe? They believe in abolishing the concept of the minimum wage. So we're not just talking about whether you raise it to $10 an hour or 12 or 8 or 9. Their view is, let's get rid of the minimum wage. And their intellectual, if you like, or their philosophical argument is that it creates government regulation and a lack of freedom to prevent, I know, it is fun, to prevent an employer in Detroit where you have high unemployment and other unemployment areas in rural America, wherever, to say, look, I'm offering you $4 an hour. And if you don't take this job, there are 5 other people who will take it. But I want to tell you, young lady, that you are a free person. Because the government of the United States of America has not mandated that there be at least a floor on the wages that I pay. That is how crazy that argument is. And it's the same thing in workplace. We have regulations now to provide at least a minimal degree of worker safety. In the old days, in factories, people would be losing their fingers and their hands, getting sick from all kinds of inhalations that they're breathing. We made some progress. They want to get rid of all that stuff. And here's my plan. Yeah, it's unhealthy in your choice. You can work it or not, but you don't want that big bad federal government making sure that there is a clean working area for you to be in. They want to abolish the Environmental Protection Agency and go, I'm telling you the truth, and go back to the days when companies could spew all the crap they want into our rivers, into our lakes, into our oceans, into the air that we breathe. I was just in Atlanta yesterday, talking to a wonderful guy who runs a community health center. We work very hard with community health centers all over this country. And he was telling me that the kids in Atlanta during the summer, the air becomes really polluted and very high rates of asthma among kids. And that's what these guys want to go. Let people do anything they want, put anything they want into the air and into our water. That is their long-term view of America. And what that view is, a handful of billionaires who are able to spend as much money as they want, electing whoever they want to support their views, politically and economically, a small number of multinational corporations and Wall Street running the economy. That is their vision of a new America. And that is a vision we must defeat tooth and nail. That the Republicans have become a right-wing extremist party. But I want to say a word about the Democrats, because I come to you as the longest-serving. Well, you may not be so happy to hear what I have to say. So hold your applause a little bit. I come to you as the longest-serving independent in the history of the United States. And I think it's fair to say that the Democrats have helped do some really good things in recent years. I don't want to talk about it, but I think it's also fair to say. Let me throw it out to you, and you will disagree with me or not. If you go up to the average person in the United States of America, and you say to that person, do you think the Democratic Party is the party of the working class of this country prepared to stand up and fight for American workers? What do you think the response will be?
No.
And that's the truth.
No.
That's right. Now, have the Democrats done a good job in areas like civil rights? I think they have. Done a good job in areas of women's rights? I think they have. Done a good job in the area of gay rights, environmental. They've done some good things, so I'm not here to trash. I work with the Democratic Party. I'm in the Democratic caucus. Some of my best friends are Democrats. And there's some really great people there. You know, you don't know their names, but trust me, there are people that work day and night for working families. Do a great job. But one would be naive not to understand that Democrats also collect a lot of money from big money interests. The Democrats also go to fundraising events where the admission is $2,000 a piece or more than that. And one would be naive not to believe that Democrats also are working for corporate interests when they should be working for the middle class and working class. So where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? I've given you some of the bad news. Let me give you what I think is some good news and some ideas of where we have to go in the future. The bad news is a lot of billionaires have a lot of money and they want to transform America into an oligarchic form of society. The good news is that on issue after issue after issue, the vast majority of the American people disagree with their agenda. Okay? Poll after poll asked the American people, do you think we should cut Social Security? And poll after poll, last one I saw a few days ago is 76% of the American people said, don't cut Social Security. Democrats, Republicans, Independents. A few years ago, they did a poll for Tea Party sympathizers. And the Tea Party sympathizers said in very resounding numbers, don't cut Social Security, don't cut Medicare. Now some of these guys would be very surprised to find out who's funding their organization, but that's another story. But all over this country, people understand that especially in these really tough economic times, you don't cut Social Security, you don't cut Medicare, you don't cut Medicaid or veterans programs. People understand that. You know what else people understand? People understand that when the wealthiest people are doing phenomenally well, the way to balance the budget is not on the backs of the children and the elderly and the sick and the poor. The way to balance the budget is to ask those people on top who are doing phenomenally well to start paying their fair share of taxes. And the American people also understand the absurdity of folks talking about cutting Social Security and other programs at the same time as 1 out of 4 corporations in America does not pay 1 nickel in federal income tax. Okay, so what do? Good news is that by and large, most people in this country want to protect the social safety net. Most people in this country, when asked, what is the most important issue facing you? Now in Washington, for a variety of reasons having to do with moneyed interests and the media, they all assume that the major issue facing the country is the deficit and the debt. Well, it is an important issue. I want to detour on that for a moment. Right now, we have a $700 billion deficit. How did we get to that deficit? Who knows? All right. We fought 2 wars, a war in Afghanistan and a war in Iraq. No one knows exactly how much those wars will end up costing until we take care of the last veteran who fought in those wars in 80 years. But the estimate is somewhere between $3 and $6 trillion. That's a lot of money. Now, where were all of the deficit hawks when we went to war? In a war in Iraq which never should have gone to in the first place. So the hypocrisy is extraordinary. When it comes to Medicaid, we just can't afford to provide health insurance to our children. Can't afford it. When it comes to going to a war that we never should have gotten into, no problem going into that war. Second of all, and this is important for the American people to understand, these deficit hypocrites are exactly the same people during the Bush administration who gave huge tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires. And going back a few years ago, these are the same people who deregulated
Wall Street, to allow the crooks there to drive us into recession, which, by the way, when you're in recession, most people don't know this, less revenue comes into the federal government. A budget is about spending. A budget is also about revenue. And when revenue goes down, you're in trouble. And that's certainly what happened during the Wall Street recession. So I just wanted to make a point about some of the hypocrisy that we're seeing from our right-wing friends. In any case, where do we go from here? Where we go is to do what the American people want us to do. And what poll after poll tells us, you ask people, you say, okay, a lot of issues facing America, a lot of problems out there. What do you consider to be the most important problem? And you know what the American people say? Overwhelmingly, in poll after poll after poll, it's a four-letter word, J-O-B-S. That's what it is. And they understand that real unemployment today, counting those people who have given up looking for work, counting those people who are working part-time when they want to work full-time, close to 14%. Youth unemployment, close to 20%. African-American youth unemployment, over 40%. So if we want our kids not to be standing on street corners dealing drugs, but to be engaged in real work and making a life for themselves, we have a moral obligation to create millions and millions of jobs in this country. And that's what the Americans do. Overwhelmingly, 70, 75, 80% of the people want us to raise the minimum wage. So it turns out that I am a member of this conference committee, which is going to be dealing with the budget. And my message to my colleagues on the committee is going to be a pretty simple one. Let's do what the American people want. Let's create jobs, raise wages, balance the budget in a way that is fair and not on the backs of working families or the elderly or the sick. How do we do all of this stuff? Now, I'll do my job on the budget committee, but you have to do your job here in South Carolina. We have to do it in 50 states in this country. Now, the recent shutdown in Washington ended. You know why it ended? Because the Republicans looked at polls. And what they saw is an American population outraged by their behavior. Because they were so out of touch with where the American people are. People can have honest disagreements about the Affordable Care. They have honest disagreements about Social Security and everything else. I have my view, other people have different views. But you don't shut down the government, throw 1 million people out of work, deny services to tens of millions of people because you lost the election and want to do what you would have done if you won the election. And that's how, you had Republicans coming up on the floor of the Senate and they say, I hate the Affordable Care Act. I would like to repeal it tomorrow, but you know what? We lost the election. You're not going to repeal Obamacare when Obama is in the White House. Ain't going to happen. They understood that. And most Americans understood. So what we have got, what politics is really about is not what takes place in conference committees in Washington. That's important. It's not what's most important. What is most important is what takes place at the grassroots level. And our job now is to put as much pressure as we possibly can on Washington to make sure that they understand what the middle class and working families believe. That's what we have to do. Overwhelming opposition to cuts in Social Security, they have got to hear that. Asking the wealthy and large corporations to begin paying their fair share of taxes, they have got to hear that. We have to do that in 50 states in the country. Now let me conclude by saying this, and that is, I wonder how it happens that in really poor states, some of the most economically distressed states in the country, states like Mississippi, Alabama, and so forth, they keep South Carolina. tepid about that. I didn't know what I wanted to say.
Make a plan.
If you think so, I'll accept it. How does it happen, getting back to what I said earlier, that in these states where people are struggling so hard, whether you're black, whether you're white, whether you're Hispanic, whatever you are, people are struggling, that they elect people who are working against their own best interest? And I'll tell you what I think. I'll tell you what money plays a very important role in this, I know, but I'll tell you what else I think. What happens is our Republican friends are very, very smart. And this is what they do. See, they have a dilemma. My guess is that in South Carolina, they don't put 30-second ads on television. Vote for candidate X so he can cut Social Security. Has that ad been on TV? No. Vote for candidate Y so she can send your job to China. Probably not been on TV as well, right? No. So they got to figure out, they got a tough situation. Because everything that they believe in is in direct opposition to what the vast majority of the people want and need. So what do they do? You know what a shell game is? A shell game is some guy's very clever. So you see, I got the pea in this shell right here. I move around. Which hand is it in? What they do is deflect attention from the most important issues. So here's the story. You're in a family that has no health insurance. Your job went to China. You can't afford to send your kids to college. And what is the issue that I'm going to run on? Opposition to gay marriage. All right? Vote for me, because I am opposed to gay marriage. Sorry you're unemployed, you have no health care, and you can't send your kid to college. That's another issue. Or vote for me, because Barack Obama wants to take away every gun in America, right? Total nonsense, but that's what gets out. Vote for me because I'm opposed to abortion, whatever it may be. So what happens is, in Vermont, to be very honest with you, in all of this country, people have different points of view on all of those issues. Vermont is kind of ahead of much of the rest of the country. We were the first state in the country to pass gay marriage law and so forth. I understand, and I believe in that, and I believe in a woman's right to choose and all that stuff. But the main point that I want to make is we have got to reach out mostly to white working class people and say, hey, and to say to these guys, wisen up. We can have disagreements about a lot of issues. And by the way, in the state of Vermont, in terms of guns, we have no gun control at all. It ain't an issue in Vermont. It's just we're a rural state, so not an issue. But what we have got to do is bring people together around the basic economic issues that virtually everybody is in agreement with. And that has to be the focus of our country. I think if we do that, by the way, a lot of these Tea Party guys are angry because they are hurting. And they are hurting. They're scared to death about what happens to their kids. And we have got to reach out to them and make them understand that the folks who are funding that movement could care less about them and their kids. And we have got to reach out and say, yeah, we may have differences of opinion, that's called democracy. But let us stand together on the basic issues of whether our kids are going to have a decent standard of living or not. Whether all of our people are going to have health care or not. Whether our kids are going to be able to get a good education and go to college or not. So I think if we stay on those issues, if we go outside our own area of comfort, our own comfort zone, and reach out to people and talk to people, you would be surprised. And the reason I'm here, and people may think I'm crazy, but I think the South can be a leader in that area. I think that you have a whole lot of good people here, really good people. And I think that our job is to, in Washington and elsewhere, is give you the support that you need. Now, one of the things that bothers me, and again, I speak as an independent, not as a Democrat, I just do not accept the idea that money from Washington should only come into the so-called battleground states. And to, in a sense, turn its back on much of America. Now, I'm not saying that in very conservative states today you're going to win tomorrow. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But you're never going to win unless we get started in that process. In the last presidential election, this is really quite quite incredible. Barack Obama got 10% of the white vote in Mississippi. Now, nobody can tell me that with a little bit of work and money and organizing capability, you can't raise that number to 25, 30, 35% right away. You can do that. And you can do that all over the South. And it can go higher than that in years to come. But our job is to plant a seed in every state in this country, not only for the short-term political goals, but it's a moral issue. People have a right to hear an alternative point of view. They have the right to vote for strong candidates who are representing their interests. And we can't write off large parts of America. So I look forward very much to working with you and people all over this country to stimulate grassroots organizing. At the end of the day, this is my political tenet. At the end of the day, money matters a whole lot. And all these TV ads are very important, and we need money. I don't mean to de-emphasize that. But you know what's more important than money? Knocking on doors and talking face to face with people. So we put a few 100,000 people out in the streets, knocking on doors, asking people to turn off Fox television for a few moments. We can make some real progress. So let me thank you. You guys, I know probably, what's the word, are under constant pressure here. This is, the political climate in Vermont is a lot easier than it is here, I know. And therefore, the work you're doing is just so terribly important. So I just want to thank you very, very much for what you have done. I feel optimistic that we can and will make real progress in the months and years to come. Thank you so much.
That were caught up in this furlough. Would you guys stand? There were the American Federation of Government Employees that are here. Did you go furloughed at Fort Jackson? I'm sorry, what? Furloughed at Fort Jackson. Did y'all have a good meeting? Furloughed? Okay, all right. And it's, people don't realize that we have union members in South Carolina, and I want to bring that to your attention because the new president of the South Carolina AFL-CIO, Erin McKee, is at the back, and I do want to recognize her for helping to get folks here. Thank you. So, I want the senator to hear who you are, so please, we just got time for a couple of questions. If you want to come up to the mic and line up a couple of you on some questions. So that they can say your name, please, and where you're from in South Carolina, so the senator. Okay.
People want to get in line to ask questions. Come around and
Sherry's
up.
Hi, I'm Sherry Mabry, and I'm with York County Democratic Party and the South Carolina Democratic Women's League. Great to be here. It's an honor to meet you. Several years ago, in 2007, 2008, I worked for the state party, and we used Howard Dean's 50 state initiative. We had a 46 county initiative. We're trying to go back to that. I want you to know that the seeds are out there. We just need a little fertilizer.
Senator, thank you so much for everything you do. I'm Janice Bowhack. I'm a plant breeder. I'm working with several people on biofuel crops because we have all kinds of crops of biofuel, biogas, methane, frac. It's very interesting. I have a farm in the corner shade in Smokes. I'm the biggest new employer in Smokes. I got 4 people working for me. The 2012 election, I said, hey, you guys want to take off and go to Baltimore and vote? I'll give you the morning off. My 2 young guys in their 20s, one's African American, one's white. The African American guy said, man, I'm going to vote for Obama. I'm so proud. My white guy is the son of a preacher, and he's a Republican, very clearly. And he's like, I don't know if he voted or not, but he didn't really care. My 2 people who are in their 30s, high school dropouts, I'm paying them $8.50 an
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bernie Sanders, for coming to Charleston, South Carolina. I'm with the Progressive Network of Charleston chapter. My question is, the Wall Street bankers were bailed out, and they were paid for a lot of homes and a lot of their debts. And I want to ask, why haven't the homes that they've been paid for been released to the public to aid homelessness in America?
That is an excellent question, and that is a fair question. These guys helped wreck the economy. They drove millions of people out of their homes. And some of us believe that those homes that are today out there with nobody living in them should be made available at very low cost to people who need them. Needless to say, not everybody in the Congress agrees, but that is something that I think we should be striving for. I think you're exactly right. Why don't we end, sometimes these lines keep growing and growing. Why don't we end it with the one with the questions, and that's the last question, okay? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, hi, Senator, thank you for all you do. I'm Carol from Charleston Progressive Network, and you're familiar with Bill McKibben, 350.
Bill is a good friend of mine. He lives an hour away from me.
Wonderful. Okay, so my question is, what can we do to fight the fossil fuel industry that are killing us and are not...
Thank you. That's an issue I didn't even get into. I'm on the environmental committee. I don't know what your leaders are telling you here in South Carolina, but let me tell you, global warming is real. Global warming has been created by man-made activities. Global warming is already doing serious damage to this country and the world. It will only get worse if we don't transform our energy system.
Amen.
Now I've worked very, very hard, but I have to tell you, and just to show you how absurd it is, the former chairman of the Environmental Committee, before Barbara Boxer became chair, the former chairman was a Republican named Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma. And you know what Jim believes? He wrote a book about it. I think his book was called The Great Hoax. He believes that global warming is a hoax perpetrated by Al Gore, the United Nations, and the Hollywood elite. End of quote. So that is the issue that we have. But your point is well taken. This planet is in serious problem. America can be a leader in that transformation. And by the way, you know what? When we move to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, you also create millions of jobs. So that's something we want to do.
I think I'm one of the only South Carolina cars out there with a bumper sticker with your name on it for Senator.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming. I appreciate your message that we all need to get out and knock on doors and organize to get people elected that are going to represent us. I have a question though. For 30 years I've been listening to Grover Norquist and the rest of that fascist wing of the right party talking about killing my government, and I have felt that that was sedition for the last 30 years, and in the last 2 weeks they've organized, they're trying to overturn laws, and they're saying it right out loud on the floor. You've got 18 senators that voted to get rid of my government, and 117. I think every one of them should be put up for sedition, and maybe while they're dealing with the legalities of that, they won't bring this coup d'etat back in the next 3 months. What do you think about that?
Probably not going to happen. But this is what should happen. I do a radio show every Friday. People call up that kind of anger every week. But here's the answer. The way you deal with that is by defeating them and throwing them out of office. And the way you throw them out of office, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in the way you say in Washington. What has to happen is people in those districts have got to understand the terrible thing that these guys have just done, but more importantly, what they stand for. They do not represent the interests of the people in their districts, in my view. They may represent the interests of the wealthy and their business community, but not of working people. That's what our job is. Yes, sir.
My name is Blake Wheeler. I'm a retired professor of labor relations.
Right.
And the idea behind it was to balance the power between the bigger man by encouraging, and the statute says this, expressly encouraging the practice and procedure of collective bargaining. Republicans have figured this out, and they're systematically destroying these in the country. It's easy that everyone has to figure that out. And I think it is part of the solution that must be considered.
Well, I think that's not quite how many of us have figured it out. For a number of years now, you know that the National Labor Relations Board itself is dysfunctional because Republicans wanted to have full membership. The majority leader, Harry Reid, took a very strong stand and demanded and threatened that bad things would be happening to our Republican friends unless that board was filled, and it was filled a few months ago. But the important point is, and you're exactly right, I can't cover everything in one speech. Clearly, if we're going to save the middle class, we have to rebuild the trade union movement. And clearly the trade union movement nationally and state by state is under fierce attacks, right to work and so forth and so on. So some of us believe in the card checkoff, pro-card check effort, which means that if 51% of the workers in a unit, a bargaining union, sign a card, they've got a union. That exists in many countries around the world, and that's what we need to see. So if your point is that we need to grow the trade union movement big time, and that in fact the trade union movement today, and I want to thank all of the trade unionists here, believe me, if you think this country is in trouble today without what the AFL-CIO and the other unions are doing, we'd be in a lot worse shape. So thank you very much.
Senator Sanders, I just want to say I am such a big fan of yours. I so much appreciate the work that you do. Let me say that first. My name is Gloria Bromell Tinubu. I was the Democratic nominee for Congress. I was the Democratic nominee for Congress in the new 7th Congressional District here. What you said earlier is absolutely correct. The National Party has to make a commitment to this part of the country. They did not do that last year.
Did you get any support at all?
None at all. None at all. None at all. So I'm considering running again next year. Either for that seat or a statewide seat. But I certainly need your help and support in communicating to the national office that we are in a position to change this country, but it has to start in the South.
I am conveying, I'm trying to do two things. And you know, I think it's going to take a little bit of time. The mentality there in Washington, which is in one sense not a crazy mentality, but in another sense, if you think into the future, it is. This is what these guys think. This is how it's done, because I've been in these meetings with very smart guys. Guy gets up there and he says, way high up in the Obama campaign, he says, okay, literally, we have determined that there are 37 different configurations by which we can win this election. Literally. Okay, we can lose New Hampshire, but we can win Indiana. We can lose Indiana, but we can win Wisconsin. We can lose Wisconsin. You know, they go through all of these things, all of which are quite right. And in fact, that's how it played out. That's exactly. They figured these things out. They are very savvy with demographics, and they come pretty close to knowing it. Now, what are they missing? So they did that analysis, and in fact, it worked. But what do they lose in that analysis? They lose the fact they concluded they were not going to win in South Carolina. But you ain't never going to win in South Carolina unless you start someplace, right? And I think just putting that off and off and off and never funding or giving support. Now, my guess is, you know, they're playing in Washington with huge amounts of money. My guess is $500,000 in your campaign would have mattered a little bit. So the point is that sometimes, even in races, it's not even as high as Congress. You could have state legislature, state senate, where a $5,000 check could make a heck of a lot of difference in a campaign, right? I mean, small money. So I am in agreement with you, and I am, the difficulty that I have, and this is the irony. How many senators do you think we have in the Democratic caucus from the South fighting for money from the South? Well, the answer is virtually none, because they're not there. So it becomes a cyclical thing. They're not there, we don't elect people into the future. Let me get your name and phone number before I leave, okay? Okay.
Hello again, Bernie.
This gentleman is somebody I knew in Vermont. He lives in Lindenville, Vermont.
Northeast Kingdom.
Northeast Kingdom,
Down here in
Vermont.
Sun City in the low country of South Carolina. All I gotta say is I wish we had more people with your voting record down here. Right on, Bernie.
I'm very proud to be standing here with you. I follow you constantly. My name is Michelle Hutchinson, and I'm a veteran of the Civil Rights Movement. And during the Civil Rights Movement, it was a grassroots movement. We went from door to door, and that's how we got people out. I live in Columbia, and I'm a Southerner by choice. Having been in the Civil Rights Movement, Philadelphia's my home. So when I get to Columbia, I'm ready to go door to door. Now, the black people, we pretty much have under control. But as you, in terms of voting, okay, we've got them ready. They understand that they have to vote.
I want to interrupt you for a second. I'm going to give you my fact. I want to make a point here. As you talk about African Americans, black people. Why are black people often more politically conscious than white people? Because they understand what happens. They understood what slavery was about, what segregation is about, the impact of racism on their life. And what we have got to do, if I can interrupt you, I'm going to give it back to you, is to make many of these white working class guys also understand what the impact of government decisions and non-decisions is on their lives.
We even have white people coming up with good ideas on how to get more black people. However, I myself have gone to the rural area where there are white people and trailer parks where there are white people, and some of them are nice by saying no thank you before they even open the door. And some of them, when I tell them why I'm there, they say no, they're Republican. So my thing is that, with all due respect to white people in South Carolina, you need to get out there to the people, and I'm not just talking about the middle class like you are, I'm talking about the low income, because those that vote, and some of them vote, they religiously vote Republican against their own. And you've got, during the Civil Rights Movement, we did not tell them what candidate to vote for. We asked them, what is the most important thing that you need in your life? And most of them said jobs, okay? This is back in the 60s.
Nothing's changed.
So we would tell them, they would say jobs, they would say Medicaid, they would say health care, okay? And then we would let them see what candidates were doing that, and that's it. Choose the candidate that is going to do. So I would like you to deliver to these folks so they can take it back to their communities, that the white folk need to go talk to the white folk.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can tell you that in Vermont, we go knocking on trailer We go into trailer parks and we go knocking on doors there as well. That is exactly what we have to do. All right, let me once again thank you very much for inviting me to be with you this morning. I am not unoptimistic about the future. I think we have great political possibilities. I think once many of those folks living in trailer parks without health care, without jobs, understand what's going on, and our job is to make them understand what's going on. Our job is to make them understand that politics is not a joke. It is a life and death issue, that they have got to get involved in the process. That's what we have to do. And I look forward to working with you in the months and years to come to make that happen. Thank you very much.